War has always been a time of suffering, destruction, and chaos. In the heat of battle, faith is often tested, and darkness seems to prevail. But sometimes, even in the midst of horror, something extraordinary happens, something that defies human understanding. A moment that shakes the soul, proving that divine presence is real. This is the story of one of the most shocking miracles in history, an event that took place in 1572, during one of the bloodiest religious conflicts in Europe. A group of mercenaries, known as the Sea Beggars, launched a ruthless attack on a small Catholic town in what is now the Netherlands. Their mission was simple: erase Catholicism, destroy churches, and eliminate the faithful. What they did not expect was to come face to face with something they couldn't explain. In an act of pure sacrilege, these men desecrated the Eucharist, trampling the consecrated hosts beneath their boots. They mocked God, thinking they had proven his powerlessness. But God responded. What happened next stunned the soldiers, terrified the witnesses, and left a mark on history that still echoes today. The Eucharist began to bleed, and those who had once laughed were now shaking with fear. This is not just a historical event. It is proof that Christ is truly present in the Eucharist. And today, you will discover the miracle that changed everything. To fully grasp the weight of this miracle, we need to step back into the brutal reality of 16th century Europe. The continent was engulfed in religious conflict, with Protestant and Catholic factions locked in an unrelenting battle for dominance. At the heart of this chaos were the Sea Beggars, a feared group of anti-Catholic mercenaries. They were ruthless, determined to erase any trace of Catholicism from the lands they conquered. Churches were desecrated, priests were executed, and holy relics were destroyed. Their next target? A small town named Gornchem, in what is now the Netherlands. When the Sea Beggars arrived, the people of Gornchem were powerless against them. The mercenaries stormed the town's main church, breaking down doors and dragging terrified civilians out into the streets. The priests, knowing what was coming, clung to their faith, but they were no match for the invading force. The soldiers stormed the altar, where the blessed sacrament was stored. With mocking laughter, they seized the golden chalice, removing the consecrated hosts and scattering them across the cold stone floor. Then came the ultimate act of blasphemy. One soldier, sneering, lifted his mud-covered boot and stomped on the Eucharist. Another followed, and another. Soon, they were all grinding the sacred hosts beneath their feet, believing they had proven that God was powerless. But in that moment, the atmosphere changed. The air grew heavy. The mocking laughter faded. And then, something impossible happened. A deep silence fell over the church. The Eucharist began to bleed. At first, it was just a single drop. Then another. Then a steady, unstoppable flow of blood. The soldiers stepped back in horrified disbelief. Their boots were stained red. The stone floor was covered in blood. This was not an illusion. This was a divine response to their desecration, one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The church, once filled with mocking laughter, had turned into a chamber of terror. The blood continued to flow from the desecrated Eucharist, spreading across the stone floor, seeping into the cracks. The soldiers, who moments ago had laughed at God, now stood frozen in fear. Their faces lost all color, their hands trembled, and the reality of what they had done sank in. One soldier, his voice shaking, whispered, "This is impossible." Another stepped back, trying to rub the stains of blood off his boots, as if erasing the evidence could make the horror disappear. Some instinctively made the sign of the cross, suddenly aware of the divine presence they had just defiled. But not all of them responded with fear and repentance. Some, blinded by pride and rage, refused to accept what was happening. "This is a trick," one of them shouted, drawing his sword and striking the altar, sending sacred relics crashing to the ground. Another, desperate to silence the miracle, kicked the consecrated hosts aside, only to see the blood spread even further. The more they tried to fight it, the more undeniable the truth became. They had desecrated something holy, and heaven had responded. The sheer magnitude of the event began to break the resolve of some of the men. One of the soldiers collapsed to his knees, his hands clutching his head. Another fled the church, unable to bear the weight of what he had witnessed. But for the remaining men, their hatred and arrogance would seal their fate. Instead of repenting, they turned their wrath toward the priests of Gornchem. They could not allow the world to hear about this divine warning. With rage consuming them, they issued an order that would stain history forever. Find the priests, Kill them all. The hunt for the servants of God had begun. The soldiers, still shaken by the miraculous event, now had only one goal: erase all evidence and silence anyone who could spread the truth. The order was clear: find the priests. Kill them all. With torches in hand, they stormed through the streets of Gorincham, pounding on doors, demanding answers. The townspeople, terrified but faithful, refused to betray their clergy. Furious at their silence, the soldiers resorted to brutality. They dragged men from their homes, beat them in the streets, and set houses ablaze. The smell of smoke and destruction filled the air, yet the priests remained hidden. But they couldn't stay hidden forever. After hours of ruthless searching, the soldiers found what they were looking for: a small Franciscan convent, tucked away at the edge of town. Inside were 19 priests and religious men, gathered in prayer, their faces calm, their faith unshaken. Leading them was Father Nicholas Peake, a man renowned for his unwavering devotion. As the soldiers burst into the convent, weapons drawn, Father Nicholas did not flinch. He simply looked at them and said, "If this is my time, let it be for God's glory." The soldiers seized the men, binding their hands with rough ropes, dragging them out into the cold night. The people of Gorincham watched in horrified silence as their spiritual leaders were paraded through the streets like criminals. Instead of crying out in fear, the priests began to sing, their voices rising over the sound of the marching boots. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." The soldiers, unnerved, shoved them forward. The priests were headed to their final destination, a place where their faith would be tested to its very limits. What awaited them was not just death, but trial of the soul unlike anything they had ever faced. Would they stand firm, or would fear break their spirits? The cold, damp air of the cellar where the priests were imprisoned felt thick with dread. The soldiers had thrown them into the darkness, locking the heavy wooden doors behind them. For days, they endured torture, beatings, starvation, and the constant whisper of temptation. "Deny your faith and live," the soldiers taunted. "All you have to do is reject the Eucharist, and you will be free." But not one of them wavered. Among them, Father Leonard Van Vel stood out. Though weakened, his faith shone even brighter. He whispered, "We do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from God." The soldiers, growing desperate, brought the desecrated hosts before them. "Spit on them, trample them, and you walk free," they sneered. A moment of heavy silence filled the room. Then Father Leonard, with bloodied hands and trembling fingers, reached out, not to destroy, but to protect. He gently lifted a consecrated host, whispering, "Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed." Then he consumed it. The room fell into an eerie silence. Even the most hardened soldiers hesitated, as if witnessing something beyond their comprehension. But their commander's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Enough. If they won't deny their faith, they will die for it." The death sentence was pronounced. The 19 men, exhausted but unbroken, were led out under the pale dawn sky. Their feet dragged through the muddy streets, yet their spirits soared. At the execution site, the wooden gallows stood tall, casting long shadows in the morning light. The soldiers lined them up, offering one final chance. "Deny your faith, and you will live." Father Nicholas Peake looked at his brothers, then smiled. "I have spent my life preaching that Christ is truly present in the Eucharist. I will not deny him now." One by one, the priests were hanged. Their last words were not cries of pain, but prayers of devotion. Their faces showed no fear, only peace. Their sacrifice was complete. Their legacy was just beginning. As the bodies of the 19 martyr priests hung lifeless, a chilling silence settled over the town. The soldiers, once filled with arrogance, now stood unsettled, their victory feeling hollow. They had expected to break the faith of these men. Instead, they had witnessed something they could not understand, faith stronger than death itself. But their story was far from over. Word of the miracle at the church and the martyrdom of the priests spread like wildfire. The people of Gorincham, who had hidden in fear, now emerged with a newfound courage. They returned to the execution site, retrieving the bodies of the priests and vowing that their sacrifice would never be forgotten. Even the desecrated hosts, once trampled under the boots of the soldiers, were gathered with reverence. The bloodstains on the church floor were preserved, a silent testimony of a supernatural event that no one could deny. The miracle that would not be silenced. Despite the efforts of the soldiers to erase every trace of what had happened, the story of the Eucharistic miracle refused to die. The Catholic faithful in the Netherlands clung even more tightly to their beliefs, seeing the priests as holy martyrs who had given their lives for the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Even in Rome, whispers of the miracle reached the Pope's ears. Nearly 300 years later, the Church officially recognized these priests as martyrs of the faith. In 1867, Pope Pius IX canonized the 19 martyrs, ensuring that their story would be remembered for all time. What does this mean for us today? This story is not just a historical event. It is a challenge to our faith. Do we truly believe in the Eucharist? Are we willing to defend it as they did? How strong is our faith when tested? The martyrs of Gorensham left behind more than a story. They left a call to action. Even today, the Eucharist is under attack. Faith is being tested. And just like in the past, the world wants to silence the truth. But the question remains, will we stand for it, or will we stay silent? The martyrs of Gorensham did not die in vain. Their sacrifice stands a monument of faith, a testimony that the Eucharist is real, and that no force on earth can silence the truth. Their story, once meant to be erased, has now reached millions, igniting faith in the hearts of believers around the world. What can we learn from them? Their unwavering devotion challenges us today. Do we stand for our faith, even when it's difficult? Do we recognize the power of the Eucharist in our lives? Are we ready to defend what is sacred as they did? Faith is not just about words, it's about action. The martyrs stood firm, even when faced with death. But in today's world, standing for our beliefs takes a different form. We might not face execution, but we do face a culture that mocks faith, a society that tells us that God is not real, that the Eucharist is just a symbol, that miracles do not happen. But we know the truth. And like the martyrs, we must never let it be silenced. How can you honor this sacrifice? Faith is not just about remembering the past, it is about carrying it forward. Strengthen your faith. If these priests were willing to give their lives for the Eucharist, how much more should we value it? Attend Mass, receive the Holy Communion with reverence, and deepen your belief in Christ's real presence. Defend your beliefs. The world is constantly trying to erase the truth. Speak up, share this story, and let others know the power of the Eucharist. Share this message. The soldiers tried to silence this miracle, but the faithful refused to let it be forgotten. Now, it's our turn to spread the truth. Comment below. Do you believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist? Share your thoughts and experiences. Your words might inspire someone else to strengthen their faith. Don't forget to subscribe. Stay connected as we uncover more hidden stories of faith, miracles, and divine intervention. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Let us honor the sacrifice of the martyrs, not just by remembering them, but by living our faith with the same courage they showed.